waking up in the dead of night, your heart pounding, convinced that the shadows in your room are breathing, watching you with eyes that aren't human. What if those whispers you've dismissed as wind are pleas from the forgotten dead, trapped in lands stolen from ancient tribes or scarred by unspeakable tragedies? Tonight, we dive into the abyss of real ghost stories, shared by those who've stared into the void and felt it stare back. These aren't fairy tales. They're raw confessions from suburban homes built on Native American burial grounds, cursed family lineages, and entities that latch onto the living like parasites. As we unravel these tales, ask yourself, could the chill running down your spine right now be more than just imagination? Let's set the stage in the shadowy underbelly of American history, where the supernatural isn't just folklore, it's a lingering curse from the past. Many of these stories unfold in places like suburban neighborhoods in the Northeast or the Deep South, where modern homes sit atop lands once belonging to indigenous peoples, such as the Rancocas Indians of New Jersey. Historical records show that tribes like the Lenape, which include the Rancocas, were forcibly displaced in the 18th and 19th centuries. Their sacred farmlands turned into colonial settlements. Treaties like the Walking Purchase of 1737 tricked them out of vast territories, leading to bloodshed and unrest. But what if the spirits of those betrayed never left? Cultural anthropologists note that Native American beliefs often include ancestral spirits who guard their lands, manifesting as guardians or vengeful entities. In the South, places like Georgia and Louisiana carry the weight of slavery, chain gangs, and cult activities, echoes of forced labor and dark rituals that imprint on the soil. Skeptics might scoff, claiming it's all psychological, but when multiple witnesses describe floating figures or demonic attachments, the line between doubt and dread blurs. We'll explore these haunted spots, from trolley tracks built by prisoners in D.C. suburbs to bayou homes in Louisiana riddled with cult horrors. The paranormal here isn't random. It's rooted in cultural wounds that refuse to heal, drawing entities that feed on emotional residue. As tension builds, we'll escalate from subtle hauntings to full-blown demonic pursuits, culminating in a revelation that might make you question your own shadows. Our journey begins with a tale that creeps in slowly, like fog over forgotten farmland. This story comes from someone who grew up in a New Jersey suburb where the houses were fresh, but the land whispered of ancient owners. Listen closely as they recount their childhood encounters in their own words. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood where the houses were built brand new. The land was farmland before they built the houses and belonged to the Rancocas Indians before that. When I was a child, I would say around 5 or 6 years old, I had my first ghost encounter. It was Christmas Eve. I was sleeping in my bed when I was suddenly and rapidly awoken. I looked towards my bedroom door, only to see a grayish white entity looking dead at me. All I could make out was the head and shoulders. I called out, "Santa," a couple of times, being I was so young. The entity disappeared down the hallway, so I hopped out of bed to follow it. I was suddenly halted by the bedroom door, looking down the hall. The entity was standing at the end of the hall, looking at me. The entity had no legs from the knees down nor feet. It moved, floated towards the back of the house out of my view. I had a terror come over me, so I jumped in bed and pulled the covers over my head. The next day, Christmas Day, I woke up with my covers over my head and was still afraid. Years later, my brother admitted to seeing the same type of entity at night and awoken by them. He checked the house. When I was a young teenager, I was up alone late one night playing video games. I felt like someone was behind me, and the feeling of being watched disturbed me, so that I checked the windows for peeping Toms. It was getting late, so I turned off the game, turned off the lights, and headed towards my bedroom in the dark. Something or someone tapped or flicked me on the back of my head. I froze. I said aloud, "Not now. I'm tired and want to go to bed." I didn't look back and continued to my room. Only a couple of months after that head tapping, I was in the house alone with our family pet dog. My mother was outside doing some sweeping. Before I headed out the door to help my mother to clean up outside, I placed a drinking glass inside a cup that was inside a bowl. My mother said she didn't need help, so I headed back inside where our dog was. When I got back inside, the first thing I noticed was that the cup was removed from the bowl and the glass was inside the bowl. The glass would have had to have been lifted, cup removed, and the glass put down in the bowl. I looked at the dog and he was acting funny, like he was scared and happy I came back in. The most recent experience is only a few years ago. I was asleep, and I usually wear lounge pants to bed. Something was lifting the cuffs of the pants and letting go. I could feel the lounge pant cuffs lifting and dropping several times. I kicked my legs for whatever was there to stop. It stopped and hasn't happened since, but now it clicks the pens that I keep in my bedroom and moves stuff on the stand where my lamp is and pens are. This event happened not long ago and is the best experience I ever had, and in broad daylight too. I was sitting on my couch putting my socks and shoes on. I'd say it was near noon. I felt the aura of the room change, like all the electricity was sucked out of the living room. Tying one of my shoes, I could see shoes that were transparent about 3 to 4 feet away from me. I knew what it was, so I didn't want to lose my gaze or blink. I slowly looked up, keeping my eyes locked on the entity. I followed the shoes up. The pants were blue jeans in nature. The shirt looked like green flannel button-up shirt with long sleeves that was tucked into the pant with a belt. It looked nicely kept, new-looking, but still transparent. The face was hard to make out being transparent, and the dining room behind, but the hair was parted on the side and nicely combed, not messy. It vanished before my eyes, and I had to share my experience with family since my grandfather that passed used to dress that way. Other than my brother's experience and my own, the rest of my family members refused to claim to have had experiences. My mother, though, has claimed to feel things walk by her and things being moved around. I did use the flashlight trick that paranormal investigators do and was in contact with someone who claimed not to be a relative, nor knew who I was. My mom was there for that. Chilling, isn't it? This entity's persistence, mimicking a loved one yet floating without feet, hints at unrest from the Rankoka's lands, perhaps a spirit displaced by colonial expansion. as historical accounts detail how European settlers disrupted burial sites, unleashing what native lore calls wandering souls. But skepticism lingers. Could it be sleep paralysis or family folklore? Yet the shared sightings defy easy dismissal. As we delve deeper, the shadows grow longer, leading us to a story where childhood innocence collides with something far more sinister, rooted in Ouija board mishaps and emotional turmoil in Dallas, Texas. This next account escalates the dread involving a red man entity that attaches like a jealous shadow, appearing in Georgia and beyond. Cultural contexts here draw from Southern folklore of Haints, restless spirits born from unresolved anger, often tied to family curses or occult dabbling. Hear it from the witness themselves. I have some concerns, but to understand, I should start at the beginning. When I was about 3 to 4 years old, my grandmother was messing with an Ouija board around me. At one point, there was a knock on the door, and when grandmother checked outside, nobody was there. I told her, "There is someone. It's a man, and he wants you to let him in." My grandmother said no, quickly shutting and locking the door. The house suddenly felt like there was earthquake. She took the Ouija board and burned it. I then start becoming sensitive to people's emotions and places of deep emotions. History. This happened in Dallas, Texas, 1994. Fast forward to age 9. I was taken in by my other grandparents. Parents were divorced and not taking proper care of me and younger sister. I was in my room, very upset, as I didn't like the way everyone was treating me. A black mass in the shape of a dog of some sorts appeared. It told me it would be my friend, my strength, and the only thing I had to do was let it be a part of me. Well, kid me just assumed I had made an imaginary friend, so I agreed. I continuously saw an unknown figure throughout the house. That was between 1998, 2008, Marietta, Georgia. Since then, I have had a strong connection with spirits, places, like I had become a magnet. But only one is really strong and has been attached to me. My exes and now husband have all claimed to see him in some sort of way. 2006, 2009. First ex swore. One time he saw a man of red hugging me, and it caused my eyes to turn red themselves. 2009, 2011. Second ex swore he saw the man of red several times in the house, and he always seemed angry towards him. 2014. My now husband has dreamed of him, saying the man was standing outside of the house, looking at him angrily. I never spoke of the man to any of them until they mentioned the encounters. There are times I don't quite feel like myself, like I'm in a trance or in a dream. I have been told I talk in strange and different voice in my sleep. I had many strange and vivid dreams, especially after having my first child. The spirit doesn't seem interested in the children, but to my partners. Can anyone give me any advice or suggestions? The angry red man evokes tales from Native American and African American folklore in the South, where red-hued spirits symbolize rage from historical injustices like the Trail of Tears, which displaced thousands near Georgia in the 1830s. Is this entity a protective ancestor gone rogue, or a demonic attachment from the Ouija mishap? Skeptics point to psychological projection, but the consistent sightings by unrelated partners build a case for something otherworldly. Do you feel that intense energy creeping in? The tension mounts as we shift to a tale of demonic attachment, where childhood glimpses evolve into nightmarish pursuits, possibly linked to family trauma. This story intensifies with scratches, growls, and possessions, echoing cultural beliefs in demons, from Christian-influenced American hauntings, often tied to unresolved childhood abuse or home invasions. The witness shares their terror in vivid detail. I think it all started when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and it attached itself. Me and my friend were watching TV, and I saw something white in my peripheral vision, and when I looked, it was a small ghost boy. My friend saw it too, and it ran into the other room. We looked everywhere, but all the lights were off and everyone was asleep. So who or what did we see? We moved a couple years later, and that's when everything got weird. At the beginning, I started hearing footsteps. Then I started hearing things like voices. I heard a little girl laughing when I was home alone, and she ran off with these heavy footsteps. Just know little girls do not weigh that much. That's how heavy it sounded, and I heard this twice. I also get scratched all the time, even today, and hear loud bangs on the walls. Another thing is, I was never afraid of the dark. Someone exhaled in my ear twice, and something pulled my covers. I yanked them back, but something pulled back as well. But that's not the reason why I'm so terrified of the dark. One night, I was laying on my side, and I had this intense feeling of being watched, and when I turned my head a little, I saw in my peripheral vision half of a body. It was so tall and dark. Yesterday, my brother and sister thought it would be cool to play around. We had the door open, and my brother heard a growl. Then we heard it, and it was very, very deep. No animal or man sounds like that. I'm still seeing things and feeling bad energy all the time. I get very bad nightmares too of me being possessed or chased by demonic entities. The growls and scratches recall demonic lore from exorcism cases in Catholic history, like the 1949 St. Louis case that inspired films, where attachments begin in childhood vulnerability. Could this be a poltergeist fueled by family stress, or a true demon? Skeptics might blame sleep disorders, but the shared auditory hallucinations challenge that. As the drama builds, we enter the realm of lucid dreams and chain gangs in a D.C. suburb haunted by prisoner echoes. This account ramps up with Frankenstein, chains, and groans from historical forced labor, tying into the grim reality of 19th century chain gangs in the U.S., where enslaved or imprisoned black men built railroads under brutal conditions, as documented in books like Slavery by Another Name. The witness recalls their earliest terrors. As this is my first story shared on this site, I felt it makes the most sense to begin at a beginning. I'm a rare individual who has always known ghosts and therefore has never doubted them. I'm also a lucid dreamer. This is also a part of me that is hardwired. Unfortunately, when one is under 4, this makes for some very confusing and terrifying experiences, not helped by the fact that one can barely speak properly. And for anyone wondering, yes, I can remember being 18 months plus, and I have memories that have been corroborated by my very surprised parents, and ones that weren't captured on photographs. False memories or other memories can be adjusted to fit a photograph, and the more one sees it, the more real it appears in their mind. Memory is a funny thing. There were 2 main spiritual experiences I had as a kid, one benevolent, the other just negative, though it never seemed to notice me much. I had what my parents called imaginary friends. But they weren't imaginary. They were in my dreams. Their names were Goosap and Pop Pop, and they were 2 men in the 60s, 70s who drove a red convertible and wore Hawaiian shirts with khaki pants and lived in the country. They held hands and shared a small cottage in the country, and I had dreams about them and me having meetings at my church. They were always associated with God and other spiritual beings, and were quite kind. It got to the point where I packed a bag, scared my parents, and sat on the front porch and waited for them, backpack, sneakers, and all. I remember falling asleep in the twilight on a spring or summer evening. My reality carried over to the dream, and they explained that they only existed in dreams and couldn't be found in reality. I was pissed and only saw them intermittently after that. The first malevolent thing I remember during potty training years was the struggle with what I called Frankenstein. I don't know when I began calling it that. It just was the only thing that fit. I'd feel fine during the daytimes, but at night, even my earlier memories, when the shadows were at a certain angle and everyone else was asleep, I'd hear chains and groaning. Never did they seem to come for me, but consistently, I'd awake at a similar time as the shadows from the trees outside my window were in similar or identical places. It was the 90s. I had no clock in my room, and I couldn't read yet anyways. There were never any lights left on. My dad is an environmentalist. We were broke, and I would feel fine in the house up until midnight or so, up to the age of 10 when we moved. This was a time-specific event, to the point where my cats would come in and sleep with me, and run in when I heard the chains. Pablo and Ezra, my cats, would sleep with me in my crib. My parents were frustrated that Ezra and Pablo insisted on sleeping in my crib, but we refused to be separated, and each of us would mewl and cry uncontrollably until we were reunited. I remember little about Ezra as he died when I was a bit older than 2, but I remember not understanding, not crying, and asking my mama where he was to the same answers and the same tears when he died. It made no sense to me, and Frankenstein continued. It also meant, unfortunately for my parents, plenty of bedwetting, as it was too terrifying to walk through the dark house, into the hall, 8 feet, with a creepy mask next to my room and Frankenstein howling. Whenever I gained the courage to yell for my parents, it always took them time to wake as it was after midnight, and they were dead asleep. Lights would turn on, Frankenstein would cease, until they went back to sleep, that is. My sister was born when I was 3, 1 and 2, and I experienced this both before and after her birth. I eventually had my own bed, which Pablo would sleep with me as well. He would always come running when Frankenstein began. Once, when my sister was too little to share my room, we shared a room in this house, so I was 3 to 4. I walked into my room when it was dark. It was bedtime. I looked down and saw red eyes, and was absolutely sure my parents would notice that. I screamed for them and didn't leave, as I wanted them to know this was real. But Pablo got there first and dove under the bed. Seconds later, my parents entered and turned on the lights, and I saw the red eyes for a moment longer, but Pablo won. They saw nothing and told me it wasn't real. Frankenstein continued intermittently, but I'd awake often at what I now knew to be about 2 a.m. I eventually got a watch, probably about 8 when I went to Girl Scout camp. I would often hear Frankenstein, but as I got older and braver, I'd either wait for it to pass, try to be awake past my parents and leave lights on. I'd read a book with my flashlight to pass the time, or use a flashlight, it was the 90s, to navigate the hall, with Pablo close by. A note about my sister. She has always been a heavy sleeper, to the point that she can only wake with the most intense alarms that both scream and vibrate her bed, even as an adult. It was always frustrating for me, as I'm a light sleeper, would hear the chains and the groaning, and would pray and hope I'd fall asleep as fast as I could. I got mega creeped out when I moved. I didn't want to encourage these spirits and had shared as little of this with my caretaker, who I'll call Mrs. Lewis, as I could while trying to figure it out. She remembers me being concerned and asking her about ghosts repeatedly for years between 210. I've always been religious. Yes, even as a young child, I relished church, the incense, the rites, the music, the rituals, the readings, everything about it. Mrs. Lewis did as well, and we are both Episcopalians. So when I felt I would be free of Frankenstein, I told her everything. When we moved out, Mrs. Lewis, who lived but a block away, asked me if I knew of the trolley. I live in a suburb of D.C., and it was one of the first and used to have a trolley that would carry people from the city to my town. What I didn't know, and had no way to know, was that this trolley used to go through what was my neighborhood. My neighborhood was developed in the 1950s, early 60s, after the trolley had been taken out, and right atop the old tracks. We don't know where exactly the tracks went, but Mrs. Lewis is a D.C. native and had lived in that neighborhood since the 1970s. Guess who built the railroad tracks according to all the people of her generation and earlier? Prisoners. What does a chain gang sound like? Chains and groaning, though I can't find any sources on this. It is often the disenfranchised who were coerced, forced into building railroad tracks. How could I have known any of this before I could speak or before I could read? How could I have made this up when I can't even find sourcing on this now? I know it was real, and this appears to be the only explanation. I now have pity for Frankenstein, as it appears to have been forced labor, and what I think of as an emotional imprint that likely attracted other things, like the red eyes under the bed. It didn't seem very conscious, as it never got closer, and simply echoed down the hall to me, and avoided light. More of an echo, less of a conscience. but filled with pain and agony. The cats weren't fans either. I now wish I could help those imprints, spirits or whatever. They don't seem happy to me. A note. Mrs. Lewis is still alive. We talk and see each other often, and she remembers this too, and still insists that the tracks were built by prisoners. She lives in the same neighborhood, and though she's had her share of experiences in the neighborhood, she's never met Frankenstein as such. I don't know why I would always awake to it. Were they reaching out? Or just waiting for everyone to sleep to express their anguish? Or did something happen at 2 to 3 a.m. that wasn't entered into the historical record, but that they still feel? Why haven't my neighbors had similar experiences? I have no answers to this, only questions. All I know is it opened me up, and the experiences didn't really stop, though Frankenstein did. I have more tales of poltergeists and one house I lived in during my college years that seemed to consume me and my friends, and we couldn't finish the lease. It was too hard. That is for later. All for now. Those chains rattling in the night. A cooker of despair from America's dark labor history, where chain gangs in the post-Civil War era chained prisoners for infrastructure projects, as per historical texts. The red eyes add a demonic layer, perhaps an opportunistic entity feeding on the imprint. Skeptics could call it night terrors, but the corroborated memories and historical tie-in make it hauntingly plausible. The air thickens now as we approach a lifelong saga of poltergeist activity, from gum-throwing ghosts to abusive hauntings in a 1949 house, infused with Southern cultural fears of family Haints. This tale heightens the emotion, with entities targeting families, echoing Louisiana voodoo traditions where spirits attach to bloodlines, often from unresolved deaths. The witness pours out their ongoing nightmare. It started when I was little. I can remember 6 to 7-year-old. I used to chew gum, and right before bedtime, I'd chew my gum and watch whatever cartoon was on TV in my bedroom. My mom would tell me to throw my gum away and brush my teeth. I wouldn't throw it away. Mind you, I'm like 6 or 7. I'd put it at the back of my TV cabinet behind a picture frame. Yes, it's gross, but whatever. I'd brush my teeth and sit back in front of my TV until time to crawl in bed. Every single time I would do this, my ABC gum would hit me in the face. I would throw it away after that. Never really scared. I remember walking down the driveway and smelling cherry cigars. My uncle was the only one who smoked them, and he was dead before that happened. At 12 years old, I used to hear a lady calling my name down the hallway at my parents' home whenever nobody was there. My parents would be out to dinner, and I'm an only child, so it was just me. Generally, I'd hear it call me 2 or 3 times. I'd never answer it. I just locked myself in the living room and learned to deal with it since it happened almost every night. I would see a figure down the hallway, could never tell if it was male or female, but the episodes started happening more. I never felt threatened, but at this time, I started getting nervous. Flash forward to 18 years old. I got married in a hurry, mainly to get out of my parents' house. We moved into an apartment in the middle of town. For a few weeks, it was decent. No episodes of any kind. Then I had my first miscarriage. I started seeing the same shadow as before. I brushed it off. I got pregnant again this time. Everything was fine. We moved into a bigger rental property, and things got way worse. I would hear arguing at night, and sometimes in the middle of the day. My husband at the time worked third. I was maybe 6 months pregnant, and I saw this shadow again go down my hallway and into my room. This burning smell started, and the smoke alarm went off. I looked around the kitchen and my room. Nothing was on fire. The alarm went off, and the smell was gone. I went back to my sofa and called my husband, crying. He called me crazy and hung up. My daughter was born early. My BP was horrible, and I had preeclampsia. At this time, she was maybe a few weeks old. I put her in my room for a nap in the playpen. For some reason, I couldn't stand her room, and I refused to let her nap in there. It was dark and just unsettling. So I left the door open in my room so I could hear her. I heard the door shut and a bang. My husband was there. He heard it too. We ran down the hallway. My door was closed and wouldn't open. He shoved it open, and being as he had to put some force into it, we saw her playpen slide across the room, so her playpen was holding the door shut. I wanted to leave, but he refused and said he don't know what happened and he didn't want to talk about it. 2 years later, we bought a house from an elderly woman's niece. Guys, I really loved this house. It was built in 1949. The husband of the woman died in 92 in the driveway. The old woman died like a week or less after we bought the house. That's why they were rushing to sell. Didn't find out until later that the late husband had a sister, that the niece moved into the house to be closer to them because she needed care. She died in my daughter's room. Did not know this until a year later. I know they didn't have kids. I don't know why. In this time, I got pregnant with my second daughter. My husband and I fight all the time. It was a horrible marriage, but I stuck it out. He became abusive, and it just got worse. I can't explain it, but during this pregnancy, something changed. The house got dark. My husband would leave me every other weekend to go camping with his friends. The basement was the worst place in the house, like something is down there. I got sensitive to the house and everything else around me. Well, I would hear a grown man footsteps upstairs when my husband was gone. I would actually go to my friend's house and just stay with her when he camped. I was terrified. This went on for months. Then my daughter was born. She was around 4 months old, and my husband was camping that weekend. So I sent my oldest to my parents to spend the night. I came in from supper that night. Nola was asleep in the car seat. So I set her in my room with the door open, and I sat in the living room next to my room. Made sure there was nothing on to wake her, and I played a game on my phone. About 10 minutes after I sat down, I heard her wake up and cry. Then I heard a grown man yell at her to shut up, and she started screaming. I ran to her. Her car seat was turned around. All of my drawers were open. I grabbed her, and my dog got in the van. Something told me to look back at the house, and in the window of my bedroom was a grown man. I called my mom crying, and she called 911. I went to her house, and my dad went to mine. He met the 2 officers at the front door. All 3 of them did a walkthrough and even walked in the woods out back. One of the officers told my dad, "No one has broken, but something is off." Flash forward to my 3rd daughter. By this time, whatever it was didn't pick on me or my girls anymore. Instead, it started in on my husband, which was great. In the basement, We were arguing one night, and I saw the light above his head swinging. I told him to watch out, and down that sucker came busted all on the floor. Over his head. It was great. Flash forward again, we moved to the spare room upstairs for a change. During this time, all of my girls slept in our room out of fear. My husband woke me up in the middle of the night, claiming that someone is in the walk-in attic beside our bed, knocking things down. I laughed at him and told him to go to sleep. Few nights before we moved upstairs, the girls and I were asleep in the downstairs bedroom. It's right next to the front porch. He was outside smoking. Mind you, this is like 3 a.m. My husband ran in, turned the lights on and started yelling at me. Claiming I was going up and down the stairs, he could hear me stomping on the hardwood. It stopped when I woke up and hasn't bothered me since, or my girls since. It's now his problem. He got mad and didn't sleep the rest of the night. Now flash forward again. My oldest is 5 years old. We were watching something on TV, and she pointed out hearing something from the kitchen. We look over and we both saw a woman walk from one side of the kitchen to the other. I couldn't help but laugh. I know I sound crazy, but it's been years of this crap, so it doesn't bother me anymore. I told my daughter not to be scared. She is just watching out for us is all. Then we hear the front door unlock, and she goes running to welcome her daddy, and nobody was there. He didn't get home until an hour later. There has been so many more episodes since that I could write a book about it. But we have since divorced and sold our house. I'm happily engaged, and the episodes have followed me to our new home, but doesn't bother us like before. It's odd, I know. It's my life, I really know nothing else. I showed my parents pictures and videos at my old house, and they 100% believe me now. They just don't know that I have been having these issues long before the house and still having them. My fiancé understands and accepts. Thank God. I'd like to figure out what is happening with me and fix it. But at this point, I think nothing would help. I'm not a religious person, and I don't find comfort in it like others do. Seems everything that could help is centered around religion. The poltergeist shifting targets, from playful gum throwing to violent outbursts, mirrors cultural stories of trickster spirits in Native American and Cajun lore, often amplified by domestic abuse, which historians link to higher paranormal reports in troubled homes. This narrative builds further dread with recurring witch nightmares, tied to divorce and Ouija sessions, evoking European witch hunts legacy in American suburbs, where fear of the occult persists in cultural memory. My entire life has been filled with paranormal experiences. The first sign that something was wrong is when I was very young, I kept asking my parents if we had ghosts. They would always answer with, "We bought the house brand new, so no one had died there." I would try to believe them, but I always had a nagging feeling they were wrong. When I got a bit older, I started having horrible, realistic nightmares. They would range all over from childhood nightmares of an evil leprechaun-sized dentist who wanted to kill me to flying snakes. Nightmare 1. It was my mother's birthday, and I had just learned how to read. My grandma had gotten my mom a card and said I should read it to show my mom how good I had gotten. I don't remember what it said, but it was hard to read, and I botched it horribly. The second I stopped reading it, my mom died. My grandma then started laughing as I bawled my eyes out. This one was so vivid, I had awoken my dad, who coaxed me awake and had to comfort me for at least half an hour. Nightmare 2. This one is short, but recurring. Basically, a witch was living in the walls of my grandma's basement. Nightmare 3. Before I had fallen asleep, I was in the playroom watching Blue's Clues. I don't know when I had fallen asleep, but I had an awful nightmare that a witch had come out of the closet and tried to attack me. As you can probably tell, there is a recurring theme of a witch. I don't know why and still haven't found out. As I grew older and my parents divorced, I was switching back and forth every week. I never had any experiences at my mom's, and the ones at my dad's had settled down a lot. It didn't start right away, but I still had an uneasy feeling in the house, especially in the old playroom. One day, I had gotten ready for school and was walking down the hall from the bathroom to the living and kitchen area. I didn't realize such a short walk would leave such a long memory. As I got to the end of the hall and could see into the kitchen, I saw a black shadow in the shape of a man. My dad was at work for another hour or two, and it was too tall to be my stepmom. There was a lamp at the end of the hall, and I was not going to be an idiot and look away, and the shadow would be gone. So without looking, I tried turning on the lamp. It wouldn't come on. As I'm staring, trying to get the dang lamp to turn on, the shadow starts to move. When a person walks, there is a bounce. This did not have any bounce. It just glided to the right toward the other hall behind a wall. I was frozen in fear for a couple minutes. Then I finally got the lamp on. Nothing was there. I did the typical thing and followed it cautiously, and it had just disappeared. I booked it out of the house and, just for good measure, texted my stepmom and asked if she had been in the kitchen. She texted back saying no. My text had awoken her. Eventually, I had gotten into some trouble and switched arrangements and moved in with my mom and her boyfriend. I figured at least this place isn't going to be haunted. Boy, was I right and wrong. It wasn't, I am. Nothing happened for a while. Then one night, as I'm trying to go to bed and can't, because of my mom's boyfriend watching TV too loud, he finally turned it off to go to bed, and I started to ease into sleep, facing the wall. Right on the verge of unconsciousness, I heard a man yell very clearly, "Wake up." Once again, frozen in fear, I waited for what felt like forever and slowly turned, praying not to see a face. Nothing was there. The next day at dinner, I was recounting what happened to my mother. Her boyfriend piped up telling me that it might have been his mom's ex whom she had shot dead in our field for his abuse towards her. A year or so later, I was talking about all the things that I had experienced, and my mom told me a story of her own. She had dabbled with a Ouija board with friends. They had stopped to get some beers from the garage, and when they came back, the TV was on, and apparently on channel 666. I think my mom might have invited something into our lives that day. While we were swapping stories, my now stepdad says, "Oh, stop. You're a teenager who thinks it's cool to be haunted, so you're making up stories." A bottle that was on top of the fridge in the back was thrown at his head. Now, back to the nightmares. My older sister had told me she had a dream of the wicked witch coming out of the closet, but I always assumed it was at my grandma's where she spent most of her time. The two of us and my dad met for lunch. and I had asked if the activity at his house had stopped. Now that I was older, he was more honest and told me yes. After I moved out, it had stopped, but they still burned sage for good measure. Well, my sister didn't stay at my dad's after the divorce, so she had no idea what we were talking about. So we started telling our experiences, and after talking about Nightmare 3, my sister stopped me and told me she had the same nightmare, at the same age, in the same room, of a witch coming out of the same closet. My dad then states that he has always felt uneasy around that closet. I have 2 theories on why I am haunted. 1, my mom invited something into our lives with her Ouija board experience. 2, the closet at my dad's house was somehow a portal, and they followed me because I am a sensitive and have always been open-minded. Years later, I met my boyfriend, and his cousin shot himself. We rushed to the hospital, but he was already gone. But everyone wanted to say goodbye. So, we went in, and everyone is crying, and all of a sudden, so do I. And I have the worst feeling of guilt. And all I can think is, I'm sorry. Mom, I didn't mean it. I am so sorry. Over and over again. As soon as we left the room, it stopped. I still have occasional experiences, but nothing like I used to. I know this is kind of all over the place, but my life has been full of random occurrences that I still have no answers to. The witch in the closet, a long darkness that spans generations, perhaps a manifestation of familial trauma amplified by Ouija invitations, much like the infamous Zozo entity in occult lore, where portals open to malevolent forces. In American cultural history, closets and basements often symbolize hidden sins, from witch trials in Salem to modern urban legends. Skeptics might dismiss it as shared family anxiety post-divorce, but the identical nightmares between siblings scream of something inherited, something that clings like a curse. Have you ever felt eyes watching from your own closet? This next tale dials up the emotional intrigue with brief, poignant happenings, possibly tied to a deceased grandfather, evoking cultural beliefs in ancestral guardians from European immigrant traditions in the American countryside. Listen as the witness shares their curious experiences. Each story of mine is only a brief explanation long, so I'm putting them together. I'm wishing for more frequent and longer experiences, though. The first happened a few years back. My younger sister and I were sitting on our back patio, listening to music and relaxing while my parents were at the other end of the house in the garage. In the middle of our house is a long hallway with the laundry room. I should add now, I personally believe each encounter I'm about to share has something to do with my grandfather that passed away 5 years ago. While outside, I would make frequent trips into the house to grab something to drink or snack on, and I never saw my parents come inside the house or anywhere near the laundry room. It was around 10 at night, and we came inside to get ready for bed. I made a trip into the laundry room to grab my clothes that had finished drying. Pooled on top of the washing machine, dripping down the front of it, was blue soap. I thought nothing of it, just that the soap container had fallen and spilled. Except then I noticed the position in which the container was sitting. Upright, on top of the laundry machine, next to the spot the soap was pooling. I picked up the container and went to set it back on the wooden shelf where it stays, and noticed there was soap on the shelf as well. It looked as though someone had intentionally grabbed the soap container, poured it onto the shelf and the top of the washing machine, then set the container down, standing upright, on top of the machine. The next happened almost a year ago, on my 19th birthday. The night before the official day was a full moon in my sun sign, Sagittarius. I'd wanted to spend it outside under the moonlight, and while doing so, I couldn't help but think about my grandfather and the experience my Aunt Amanda said she had regarding his ghost. I'm not going to try and recite her story, word for word, because it isn't mine, and I didn't see it for myself. But she did mention my grandfather, going outside and pointing at the sky after having looked into the telescope we kept close to the back door. After some reflection on her story, I chanced to look up at the sky, and at that moment saw a shooting star. Nothing paranormal, granted, and this story might not have any paranormal elements at all, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Personally, I have no relative explanation for what happened. After the shooting star, I began to make my way inside as it was around midnight. Just then, I began to hear what sounded like cheerful fair music. This is the bit I can't explain. I live in the countryside. My home is completely surrounded by thick forest. The direction in which the sound was coming from was a particularly dense portion of forest, the only thing on the other side being the home of an old farmer. I walked closer to the sound, but it didn't fade away or get louder. It went on for about 3 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I should add, my birthday is considerably close to Christmas, which could potentially explain the cheerful music, but doesn't explain the odd time and placing for it. The final experience I have to share so far is something that happened about a month ago. It was around 8 in the evening, and I was sitting on my couch reading while the TV played in the background. The remote was sitting next to me, on the other cushion, not being touched. Suddenly, the TV went black as it changed channels. I looked at the remote, which was still untouched on the cushion next to me, in plain sight. I watched as the TV switched to a channel that plays music and thought maybe one of my family members was trying to frighten me. I turned around and looked behind the couch, peeked into the hallway, called for them, but there was absolutely no one there. My sister came from inside of her room asking what I needed while we both watched as my parents came inside from the garage. I thought it best not to mention this to anyone, but as I sat back down and grabbed the remote to try and switch it back to the original channel, I became intrigued. I'd wanted to hear what the music was, so I pressed the volume button to turn it up. The volume raised about 2 notches before the remote stopped working in my hand. I stared at the TV in confusion as the volume bar began decreasing, remote in my hand, no buttons being pressed, TV in front of me, no one manually pressing buttons, all family members accounted for. My sister took notice of what was going on, and the volume decreased to 0. Once again, I began to try my luck with the remote to turn the volume up or switch the channel, and it still wasn't working. The remote wasn't dead, as we soon found out. About 5 minutes later, it began working again, as if nothing happened. We were all a bit unsettled, so we didn't speak further on the matter and went to bed soon after. A week ago, my curiosity got the better of me, and I scrolled through our TV guide to track down the music channel. I found it, had a listen, and was further amazed when my grandmother heard the music and stated that it was exactly what my grandfather loved to listen to. I hope you enjoyed these experiences as I did. They're curious and some even touching to my heart. I hope and look forward to more experiences to share here. These gentle manipulations, the soap poured like a playful prank, the TV tuning to a dead man's favorite tunes, whisper of benevolent hauntings, akin to angelic visitations in folklore from rural America, where spirits of loved ones return during celestial events like full moons, as noted in astrological traditions. Yet, the unexplained music from the woods adds a cryptic edge, perhaps echoing pagan Yule celebrations near Christmas, blending joy with unease. Skeptics could chalk it to faulty appliances or auditory illusions, but the emotional resonance with the grandfather tugs at the heart. As the shadows deepen, we plunge into a relentless harassment by hyperdimensional entities, a modern terror blending conspiracy with the occult, rooted in spiritual awakenings that invite unseen predators. This account amps up the paranoia, with entities entering through ears and ruining lives, reminiscent of targeted individual phenomena in conspiracy culture, often linked to ancient ideas of interdimensional beings in Native American and New Age mysticism. The witness pleads for answers in their harrowing tale. It all started about 8 years ago in Washington State, when I started to notice everything started going wrong in my life all of a sudden. Friends that I grew up with started to betray me. Girlfriends would break up with me for no apparent reason, and a slew of bad luck to follow. Every time I reach out to someone, they always say, "Have you ever played with a Ouija board?" Or, "Have you ever been involved in the occult?" Or, "Have you been involved in any New Age material?" And the answer is always no. To be honest, it all started when I started to seek the truth and ask questions about my very existence and why am I here. I have always felt like there was more to life that meets the eye, and I wanted answers. As I started to ask these questions and do my research, I had what most people would call a spiritual awakening. Now I have been dealing with these entities that seem to follow no matter where I go, and they are constantly attaching to me. The creepy part about it is I can actually feel the entities enter through my ears, and they also latch onto my legs and lower back. They make noises wherever I am at and harass me 24/7 and ruin any type of relationship I try to have. They also make knocking noises around my residence, thumping noises, banging noises, and loud noises in my freezer in my kitchen. I get helicopters and airplanes constantly flying over wherever I am at, and I swear, you can't make this stuff up. Deep down, I knew I wasn't the only one experiencing this, so I decided to do some more research, and I came across people that were calling themselves targeted individuals, and they said they were getting gang stalked, and you can even Google it. While my experiences were similar to theirs in every way, my perception of what was going on was different. It seemed like I finally found out what was happening to me, but I cannot find a solution to stop it after I have tried so many things. So I am here hoping someone has experienced something like this and found a solution to the problem, and that's why I am here. Thanks. The sensation of entities crawling into ears, an intense energy of invasion, echoing ancient Mesopotamian demons or modern alien abduction lore, where spiritual awakenings allegedly attract interdimensional stalkers. In cultural contexts, Washington State's history of UFO sightings and native shamanic traditions might amplify such perceptions. Skeptics label it paranoia or schizophrenia, but the shared, targeted individual community suggests a collective delusion or truth. The dread intensifies as we near the climax, with personal items vanishing in a trail of abuse-scented hauntings, following the victim like a vengeful shadow. This story heightens the frustration and agitation, with disappearing items and curry smells tied to abusive family history. Perhaps a poltergeist born from generational trauma, as seen in psychological studies of hauntings in dysfunctional homes. I'm staying with a friend until I find my own place. She's trustworthy and wouldn't mess with me. In the meantime, this morning, get out the makeup to start applying it. Go to use the eyebrow pencil and the lead has disappeared. Use this eyebrow pencil the day before yesterday. There was at least a good 2 inches of lead left in the pencil, and this morning no lead. There is a cap on the pencil, so there is no chance of it falling out. Did search in my bag for loose lead. Nothing. Even mentioned it to my roommate, and she seems to think I'm being haunted as other things have disappeared and weird things have been happening over the years. Freaking me out. Feel like I'm losing it. I smelled curry this morning and no one is cooking in the house. The last house I lived at, they used curry all the time. So sick of smelling it. I hear voices and nasty comments, and no one is there. My mother and father were both abusive and hated me as a child. Estranged for 50 years now. She is dead, just waiting for him to pass. My brother was also abused, but not my other 3 sisters. Go figure. I wasn't a problem child, just had problem parents who didn't deal with their issues. Am frustrated and agitated. What do I do or what can I do? Have had weird happenings in the last 2-3 places that I've lived at. It seems this presence is following me. Not scared, just ticked off with the nonsense. I'm a low-key type person and mind my own business and wouldn't hurt a fly. The vanishing lead and abusive whispers, a cooker of despair from unresolved parental hatred, mirroring cultural tales of familial fetches in Irish-American folklore, where spirits of abusers linger to torment survivors. Skeptics might say misplaced items and olfactory hallucinations stem from stress, but the persistent following across homes points to attachment. Now, as we reach the climax, we culminate in a life utterly consumed by the paranormal, from cult-haunted bayous to misty faces and empathic sensitivities in Louisiana, where voodoo and slavery's ghosts create a perfect storm of horror. It seems like there is never a time where I can legitimately say I have not experienced some type of paranormal experience. I grew up in a small town in South Louisiana surrounded by the bayous. The house I grew up in was well known around town for an incident that happened years before my father bought the place. A religious cult had lived there before, and a young girl that was a part of the cult gave birth to a stillborn child. Instead of doing the normal routine of a funeral then burial, this cult instead decided that they would take the baby's body around door to people's houses in an ice chest and ask the people to help pray the baby back to life. Yes, not joking. The old people around my town can tell you about it. I never knew about it until I was a teenager, and one of my friend's mom was bringing me back home one night from a party. She drove up and just looked over at me in awe and said, "Oh my, you actually live here?" I suddenly became very interested in as to why she would react that way. So I questioned her. She told me the whole story. And instead of being terrified to go back into my home, yes, I was scared in a way, but I was more appalled at what that cult had done. I suddenly came to understand why I had always felt the way I did there, and why my family was experiencing the things we were. My bedroom was at the end of a long hallway, and I cannot remember a time that I did not run down that hallway to enter or leave my room. Never failed. I would get to the beginning of the hallway and suddenly feel a heaviness around me, and I would get a knot in my stomach and start to breathe faster. Then I would run as fast as I could until I would get into the bedroom and then slam the door and suddenly calm down. It's like I felt something was staying in that hallway for some reason. I cannot explain it. We would also hear children laughing at times, and we even heard a baby crying. Yes, my best friend was spending the night as usual, and we were just coming to the second hallway that led to my room. My little brother's bedroom was also off of that hallway. His was at the very beginning of it, and his bedroom door exited to the right. Well, his bedroom door was open. I'd like to mention that he was not home. At the time, he was with his best friend fishing a few streets behind our house. And as soon as my best friend and I stepped into the hallway, we heard a baby start crying, and it was coming from my brother's room. Needless to say, she and I hightailed it out of there and ran outside and stayed in the backyard until the sun went down and we were forced back into the house. It seemed it would only target my brother and I. My mother would have some small experiences, but I think she was so accustomed to it that it became the norm to her. My father, on the other hand, never had anything happen to him. Could be because he was rarely home when I was growing up. He was an offshore oil rig electrician, so he'd be gone for half a month at a time. But it always seemed to like me the most. There was one night that I woke up to a face above mine, literally about 6 inches above mine. It was not like a normal face, though it was more so made of almost a mist-like substance. I could only make out the remnants of eyes, nose, and mouth. I was, of course, frozen in place and just stared at it. Then it suddenly dissipated right in front of my eyes. I would always hear knocking on my bedroom door, open it and find no one there. I would hear my name called all the time when no one in my home was calling me. I would feel hands on my arms or back. It became constant. Then one day I met my best guy friend, who is a medium. He is 4 years older than I am. I was 14 at the time he was 18. We began to talk on the phone every day. It was never romantic between us. It was a brother-sister type relationship. In fact, we are still very close to this day, and my children call him Uncle. And that was one way I could escape from the suffocating feeling I felt in that home. He was the one who told me that everything I was going through was not in my head, that it was all real. In fact, my home was so haunted that he had a hard time walking into it at times. He said there were over 22 ghosts in and around my home. No joke. The house I grew up in was extremely old, and so is the land there, of course. Who knows what happened on it before our house was even built? All you have to do is pick up a history book. or Google it to see how messed up it was in South Louisiana back centuries ago. He also told me that the reason why I was experiencing it so much more than anyone else in my home was because I am an empath and sensitive to spirits as well. I can sense them, hear, and see them at times. Made so much sense to me finally. I didn't like hearing that, of course, but I had to accept it. My friend told me that he would prepare himself and try to help us. He came by the house and he performed a cleansing ritual. Well, it seemed like it worked for a few weeks. Then it all started up again. He told me he was sorry, but there were just too many of them for him to fully get rid of. I ended up living in that house for another 4 years. My father finally decided to move us out of there when I graduated high school. I remember the day I moved out of that house. It was the home I had been living in since I was 4. So, of course, I had an attachment to it. And oddly enough, I felt an attachment to some of the spirits there. Not all. Just the ones who I felt comforted me at times. I remember breaking up with my boyfriend one night and crying on my bed and suddenly feeling arms around me lightly. So I know not all of them were bad. I remember standing there in the empty living room, crying for them. I felt guilty for leaving them alone again. Will the next people who moved in acknowledge them like I did? I know I sound crazy for feeling that way, but it was like leaving family. Our new place was nice, no spirits there at all, and it felt nice not to have to run to my room every time. So I lived a spirit-free life for many years. I believe I had closed off that part of me that was sensitive to spirits after I left that house. Fast forward 8 years later, I am living in beautiful Washington state, pregnant with my first child, a son, and I suddenly start feeling like I am being called back home. Of course, I was missing my family down in Louisiana like crazy, but I was enjoying my new life in a new state with my fiancé. But it was strong, and I would cry at night and want to be in Louisiana. My fiancé suddenly said, "You know what? Let's move down there." I was ecstatic, and we flew back down here in October of 2006. The next month, on November 29th, my world changed forever. My mother, who was my rock, my world, everything to me, suddenly died unexpectedly. I had spoken to her just hours before she had died, according to the coroner's report. My stepfather, my parents ended up divorcing right after we moved out of the house, came home from work and found her lying in the bathroom. It took us months to get the autopsy report back, and everything came back inconclusive. They chalked it up to a heart attack. My mother was extremely healthy and thin, no heart problems. So it was a big shock. I always wonder how I knew to come back home just in time. Was it my intuition? Was it something else? I'll never know. But I do know that after that, everything changed. I had a dream after her funeral about me looking into a mirror and pulling a giant nail out of my forehead where the third eye is, and there was a gaping hole, and suddenly an eye blinked back at me. Yes, it was quite disturbing. Since then, almost 12 years ago, I have had constant experiences no matter where I live. Every single house or apartment I have lived in since then, something always happens. I have plenty more to share with you on those experiences, but those I will save for separate stories. I just wanted to tell you about how I was first introduced to paranormal experiences. Hopefully, all the stories I share can help someone else believe that they are not alone in their experiences. Thank you for taking the time to read about my early experiences. Blessings to all. And there it is, the dramatic climax, where a cult's macabre ritual in Louisiana bayous unleashes over 22 spirits, culminating in a third eye awakening that shatters the veil, revealing that hauntings aren't just echoes, but active forces drawn to empaths, much like voodoo loa in Creole culture, where the dead demand recognition. Historical records confirm bizarre cults in the South, like the 1920s revivalist groups practicing resurrection rites, blending horror with heartbreak. Skeptics might cite grief-induced visions, but the misty face and baby cries, verified by friends, defy logic. In this revelation, all our tales converge: displaced native spirits, demonic attachments, chain gang echoes. They're not isolated. They're symptoms of a world where history's wounds bleed into the present, trapping us in an eternal night of unrest. If these stories have chilled you to the core, or stirred memories of your own brushes with the unknown, drop them in the comments below. Share the shadows that follow you, the whispers that won't fade. Your experience could be the key to unlocking someone else's nightmare. And if this journey into the abyss has gripped you, smash that like button to ward off the darkness. Share this video with a friend who doubts the supernatural. Subscribe for more tales that blur the line between life and the afterlife. And hit the bell so you never miss when the spirits call again. What lurks in your shadows? Tell me now.